Years ago, put the other one up first. Years ago, somebody gave me a plant. Now, before I was the pastor here 7 years ago, I pastored in Sumner County over in Portland, about an hour east of here. And they gave me a peace lily. I don't remember whether it was a gift or whether it was just kind of left at the church, maybe at a funeral. Peace lilies are supposed to look, do you have that other picture, Jeff? You're looking for it. Peace lilies are not, well, forget it. Peace lilies are not supposed, that's what a peace lily is supposed to look like. And I had this plant in my office. You know, I thought it brought a little bit of life. I paid enough attention in 6th grade science to know that plants eat carbon whatever, dioxide, monoxide, whatever, and breathe out oxygen. Science. And I thought it would just add to the health and well-being of my environment. And I had this plant, and I've got to tell you, those plants are very difficult to kill. And it flourished for a long time. In fact, my little plant in a little plastic potted whatever, it grew to the point where somebody had to replant it for me. And when I moved here 7 years ago, I brought it with me and put it in my office. I don't know if my plants are allergic to Montgomery County, but y'all have killed my plant dead. In fact, if my plant's name was Herbert, this is Herbert the Third. This is the end result of actually several rescue attempts. So I killed plant A dead. And then I dug a hole and put a new plant in, and over the course of maybe a year and a half of agonizing torture, I killed that plant dead. And then it hit me. Rochelle used to be a florist. Rochelle speaks plant speak. She is a plant whisperer. And so she took what was dead and made it alive again. I think she just threw away the old dead and gave me some new living plants. And I have done my due diligence in killing this plant over the last few years. When Dana and I were gone on our trip this summer, we were gone for several weeks, and I entrusted my dearly beloved Herbert III to Rochelle's keeping. And I just got to tell you, she did not do a very good job. I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. Occasionally, I will see something dead, obviously dead, and I'll just kind of pick it out. And these are the surviving images of green that are in my plant. Now, here's what will happen if I continue to do what I've always done. I'm going to kill every green image that's in this soil right now. Whatever's green is soon going to be pale green, then yellow, then sickly yellow, then dead brown. And I'll throw it away. I'll blame Rochelle and then have her get me a new plant. There's a gospel lesson here that I want to share with you today. We've been looking at the family over the last few weeks. And I want to ask you to open up your Bibles to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 13. And if you would like to this morning, you can stand in honor of God's word. We're going to be looking at Matthew 13, starting in verse 1. Let me read this to you this morning. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by a lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and he sat in it while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. And as he was scattering seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. This is a word from God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You can be seated. So over the last few weeks, we've been talking about family. We talked about God's design for family, that we didn't just dream this up. You know, Adam didn't just go, hey, how's it going? I'm a person, you're a person. Why don't we share resources? All right? God brought us together. God designed the family. God said, be fruitful and multiply. God built all of civilization on family. Your family looks different than mine. Mine looks different than yours. As you look around today, we've got different representations of family. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about parenting. Man, what a job parenting is. Today, we're going to talk about marriage. Now, let me tell you this. When Jesus shared this parable, and when he was talking about the seed and the soil and the sower, he was not talking about marriage. Are we clear with that? But there are principles here that we can glean that can help us have more godly marriages, have more Christian marriages, and in fact, will help any relationship at all. So there are principles here that I want us to get. What's the goal for any relationship? The goal for any relationship, particularly marriage, is to have a healthy, flourishing, fruitful, grounded in love, trust, mutually giving, mutual dependence, and peaceful relationship. That is particularly true in marriage. And to do that, we need good soil. Jesus was teaching about a little bit something different, but I believe there are lessons here that we can gather in regards to any relationship, but in marriage in particular. Early on, I'm pretty positive. I can say this about all of us who are either married or engaged or dating. Remember, we've got a wedding right after church today. We would love for you to stick around. I believe that people who love Jesus and love each other should get married. And I've had opportunities to do that so many times as a pastor. It is a unique privilege to marry people. And there are lessons almost everywhere you look. There are lessons here. But early on, when we're dating, I know of no couples who end up coming before a judge or a pastor and their wedding vows go something like this. How about we join forces and mutually disappoint each other for the next 45 years? How would you like to sign up for several generations of mediocrity? Nobody does that. We shower and put on nice smelling things. You put on your nice clothes. You brush your teeth. You plan the evening. Okay? So today after church, I'm going to probably look at Dana and go, where do you want to eat? And she'll go, I don't know, where do you want to eat? And we'll do that whole back and forth thing. But early on, there was planning involved. And we were near Chicago, and Chicago has some fine eating opportunities. And I had a pretty decent job back then. I was a Teamster making good union money, so that whole thing. So there was planning involved, and there was excitement, there was anticipation, there was, this is a Bible word, wooing involved. I wooed her. I pursued her. Early on, couples, is that still a thing? You couples that have been married 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50 plus years, is that still a thing? Or does it more reflect of, I told you I loved you at the wedding. If anything changes, I'll let you know. Your soil matters. And Jesus' teaching about the kingdom and about good news and about us telling others about the kingdom to come has lessons for us. Jesus' teaching here in Matthew has lessons for us about being together, about flourishing, about fruitfulness, about mutually giving and mutual dependence. So there are 4 different kinds of soil here. There's the path, there's the thin, rocky soil, there's the weedy soil, and then there's good soil. So just briefly, okay? Briefly. The path. Is your heart receptive? A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. That's all we know. That's all we hear about the path. Now, later in the chapter, Jesus unfolds the parable. You can pick up the lesson in verse 18. You can pick up some of Jesus explaining this parable. But often in our relationships, we can become so hardened. We can become so hardened that it's like a seed dropped on the sidewalk. It just does not break through. There's nothing wrong with the seed, but there's no getting through. Is your heart receptive, or are you hardened this morning? You might actually have reasons for your hearts to be hardened today. But what are you going to do with that? Are you satisfied with just, we have a hardened heart today, so we're just going to stay where we are? Well, folks, let me show you what doing what you've always done gets you. My plant is dying. And you know what I've done to get here? Almost absolutely nothing. Every once in a while, when I look at this sad, dry soil, I will get a cupful of water and dump it on there and think I've done a great, great thing. I think what I've done is I've just made it wet. And then it will dry out. And then a few weeks from now, I will just dump another cup of water on it, thinking that I've done some great thing, but I've just made it wet. So if you have hardened soil today, we need to think the goal is to have good soil. How do I get from here to there? Keep listening. The second kind of soil, some fell on the rocky places, verse 5, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Shallow, rocky soil, there's no depth. There are flashes of life, but that life quickly withers because your roots have not gone deep enough. So how do you go deep? Decide to go deeper. Go deeper, dig deeper. How? Let me tell you, I am not a trained clinical marriage counselor, but I am wearing glasses, so that gives me some level of authority this morning. So go deeper than you are today. Decide to go deeper than you are today. If your soil is shallow and rocky and might have flashes of good things every now and then, but you are not enjoying the benefit of fruitful marriage, go deeper. How? Okay, Captain Obvious. You communicate, you talk, you listen. Remember the blessed practices we talked about in April and May? Okay, the blessed practices that we talk about, begin with prayer. In particular, with making connections with your neighbors. Begin with prayer. L, listen. E, eat, my favorite. S, serve. Finally, S, share your story. That listen is a cheat code in deepening any relationship. Dana and I have found that one of our little cheat codes is, and we've told you 1,000 times, forgive me, but we walk together. Sometimes we go out and we walk one lap in our neighborhood. One lap in our neighborhood is 1 mile. It takes approximately 18 minutes if we're boogieing. There are days that we slow roll, but most days we go a little bit at pace, and it takes about 18 minutes. Almost every day we have about 18 minutes. Now, while we're walking, we are not staring at our phones or talking to somebody else. I've actually done that. When I'm out walking by myself in the morning and I'm looking at my phone, I've nearly ran into somebody's parked car, which is a little embarrassing when you're all on your own and the kids are out waiting on school buses for idiot guy to be walking into parked cars. Don't do that. But when we're out together, we're talking and we're listening. And she listens to me, and I try to listen to her. I'm working on that. That is not a natural skill for some people. It is for some. But that deepens our relationships. Focus on the other to the exclusion of secondary things. There are lots of important things in this world. I would argue that the very first number one priority in anybody's life is this: what do you do with Jesus? And the second, if you're married, is your spouse. Prioritize each other, make time for each other, make the commitment to come closer to Jesus. As you come closer to Jesus, I believe we come closer to each other. Shallow, rocky soil. The weeds. Verse 7, other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. What is sucking the life out of your marriage right now? A few weeks ago, we were in Hebrews chapter 12, and I used my backpack and talked about the fact, our trip this summer, and there were times that I was lugging around stuff in my backpack that really at the end of the day was unnecessary. It weighed me down. It might not have felt all that heavy when I put it on my back at the beginning of the day, but over the hours as time goes by, it's heavy and it weighs you down and it's unnecessary. There are things in your relationships, much less your marriage, but there are things in every relationship, there are things in your marriage that are sucking the life out of you. Whether it's finances or time or emotions or energy, there are things that are growing up alongside your marriage. And weeding, as Joe reminded me this week, is intentional. There are things that you're carrying around that you don't have to carry around. There are things in your life right now that you need to kill dead and remove. There are things that are sucking the life out of your energy, out of your marriage. Take stock, identify the weeds in your own life, in your own marriage, and get to work weeding your soil. How do you get to good soil if your soil is a path or rocky or weedy? I'm pretty sure almost every marriage, I'll rephrase that. I would like to think that almost every marriage starts with pretty good soil. we've done the bare minimum of work, perhaps, to convince the other person to make a pledge to spend the rest of their life with you. That's a pretty big deal, okay? Burger King never made me promise to never go to McDonald's again. But somehow I got Dana to meet me at the front of a church in Bethany, Oklahoma in 1993, and she said the words, I've got them recorded. Till death do us, she said it, till death do us part. And so we kind of start with good dish soil, but often because of neglect and because of drift, we drift into weedy soil, rocky, thin soil, hardened sidewalk path soil. Nobody drifts toward excellence. You drift toward this. You know how I got here? Drift. I did the bare minimum. There's even a little flag here that tells me what my plant is and how to help it. I have never read this flag. I don't really care to read this flag. And you know what I got for that? Herbert III. I wonder out there if Herbert IV is just waiting on me to come by and pick it up and bring it home. Nobody drifts toward excellence. Nobody just drifts toward financial stability. Nobody just drifts toward wonderful health. Nobody just drifts toward the leadership where you work or where you go to school. Nobody accidentally gets toward excellence. That's what you get for drifting. Do what you've always done, and you'll get what you've always got. Couples, this morning, I want to ask you the question. Turn your eyes inward. You cannot, man, I hate the one or two good counseling little nuggets that I've stolen from other good counselors. Here's one of them. You can't control the other person, whether that's parenting or whether that's a spouse. You can't control the other person. You can only control you. What are you doing about you? And I thought this last week, and I think it again. There are people here today in parenting context or in marriage context or really in almost any relationship. There are people here today that just right now, they're out of hope. They've got no hope. And I don't want to be negligent of people's realities where they are right now. I don't blame you. Knowing some of your stories, I don't blame you. If you looked at me today and said, Rich, that's awesome, but you don't know where I am today, I might agree with you. But I know this, nobody ever accidentally gets towards excellence. And if you want to take those first steps toward a better relationship in any relationship with your kids, with your family, with your parents, with your in-laws, with your boss, with those that work under you, if you want to make any changes in any relationship today, but in particular with husbands and wives today, you're responsible for you. And you take those next steps. But do what you always did, you'll get what you always got. A.W. Tozier, pastor and author and speaker, said this: anything that God has ever done, he can do right now. Anything that God has ever done anywhere else, he can do here. Anything that God has ever done for anyone else, he can do for you. Separately, I would say because of Jesus, there is nothing that is ever too dead that God cannot resurrect. Am I naive? I could be wrong. I'm not, but I could be wrong. You could disagree. It's okay. This is America. You're free to be wrong. There is nothing too far dead that God cannot help us to take our next steps. How's your soil this morning? In particular, couples, in particular, married people, but these principles are true in many relationships. Is your relationship right now with your mother-in-law, brother, sister, coworkers, boss, spouse, child? Is your relationship hardened? There's no breaking through the surface. Is it thin and no depth? Is it full of weeds and things are just sucking the life out of your relationship right now? Or is it good, healthy, fruitful soil? If it's not that last one, what are you going to do with that? Do you just give up? Every now and then I'll have people come in for marriage counseling, and my first thing I ever say is, I'm not a marriage counselor. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a trained counselor. I'm a pastor. I can give you what I got, but I'm a pastor. And I've had couples tell me, I've had husbands and wives come in and sit and say, we're getting a divorce. And I'll say, okay, I'm praying against you. All right, I'm rooting against you. I hope you don't. And at least in one case, they did anyway. Can you believe that? After I gave them perfectly good advice, they went ahead and got divorced. And at least in one case, I got to remarry that couple. There is nothing too far dead that Jesus cannot resurrect. How is your soil this morning? What do we do with this? Okay, Rich, good stuff. What do we do with this? Decide today that your hard soil, your thin, rocky soil, your soil that is full of weeds and distractions and secondary things, that is not where you want to live. That is not where you want to be 6 months from now, a year from now. And you, as long as it relies on you, you're going to do different. Whether your spouse joins you or not, you're going to be different. You're going to break through that hardened soil, at least with your heart. You're going to try and go deeper and spend time together and remove distractions, to invest and pursue. You're going to look at your life and the distractions and weeds and the things that are sucking the life out of your marriage. You're going to remove them in the pursuit of good soil. Ask for God's help. He helps us. He doesn't just say, hey, here's some good advice, go do that. He helps us. He comes along beside us. And if you're all out of ideas, Dana and I just started a marriage small group last Sunday night, and it was just introductory. We're going to meet again next Sunday night, and if you'd like more information about that, you can come and talk to one of us. It's about marriage. We're going to go through a book. The book has lots of tips and advice. We don't have great, wonderful tips and advice, but we found a book that does, and we're going to spend a bunch of time going through this, trying to help our marriage and other marriages in our church. Whew, that was a lot. We're going to pray in just a second. And I'm going to ask you to do something weird, and some of you are not going to like me for this. And I'm sorry. Ahead of time, I'm sorry. I'm not going to make people stand up and come up and, do weird stuff. But this morning, if you're married, I hope you've listened to the Holy Spirit way more than you've listened to me. I hope you've listened for Jesus to speak through this parable way more than you've listened to me and talking about my dead plant. But as we close in prayer, I would love it if our married couples would just hold hands. I know, I'm sorry. If you hate me right now, forgive me. Or try and forgive me. But if you're married If you're dating, if you're engaged, as we pray in just a moment, would you just hold hands with your spouse? So I'm going to ask Dana, would you come up? I am going to ask you if you. So would you stand up with me?